Thank you all for being here, both good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, probably for some. Um, I got the idea because I was a Peace Corps volunteer. And I had heard that the first 5 or 6 years of Peace Corps, Yale had the highest percentage of their graduating classes going into Peace Corps. And I knew about 3 other people who had. And so I thought, well, there's got to be more. 3 is not an awfully high percentage of our graduates. I now have a list of 14, 4 of which are deceased, or at least 3 of which are deceased. And there may be others. So if you know of people who've been Peace Corps volunteers, send me a note and I will be happy to add them to my list. But before we really get started here, how many people here have family members who have served in the Peace Corps? 1, 2, 3, good. 4, maybe 5. Okay, so some of you are familiar, but some of you aren't. I also have, beside my panel, there are at least 2 other people who are Peace Corps volunteers here, and I want to ask them to just briefly state where they served, when they served, and what they did. If they can do that in about 2 or 3 sentences, I would appreciate it. Doug Bingham was in Nepal. I know that. Doug, can you unmute yourself and just give a quick introduction? You're still muted, Doug.
Oh, I am.
There you go.
There I'm unmuted, I think. Hi, yes, I served in peace in Nepal for my full 2 years as the very first group to go to Nepal. I suppose in those days to go almost anywhere as you were in the first group, or almost, because it was the early days of Peace Corps. But it changed my life, I'll tell you.
Good. And you did what while you were a volunteer?
I taught school mostly and in a junior college. I did a lot of trekking and a little mountain climbing.
Wonderful. We'll hear more from you later, I hope. And Ken Harding, I know from Hawaii. You weren't in the Peace Corps in Hawaii, but where were you?
I was in Peru for 2 years, and 1962 to 1964. I was engaged in urban community development, and just like Doug was saying, it has profoundly affected my life ever since, including where I went to graduate school, meeting my wife, becoming an anthropologist. So I really, really cherish my Peace Corps involvement.
Great, thank you. I will be calling on both of them at the end. When the panel is finished, there are basically 2 questions for the panel. One is, what did you do? Why did you go into the Peace Corps? What did you do? And then we'll get into, and later they'll have a chance to talk about what it meant to them, what has happened to them is because of their Peace Corps experience. But I want to give everybody a chance to be introduced. Following the panel, I will ask the 2 former volunteers who are in the audience that you just heard from to make any comment that they wish to make. And then we'll go to the questions. And I will start with questions that have been sent in the chat first, and then I'll go for the raised hands second. And hopefully we can hear from everybody before we put aside about 15 minutes at the end for various announcements, particularly about the reunion. But just very quickly, to remind people, the goal of Peace Corps, and I'll read the 3 goals because they're very short, to help people of interested countries in meeting their need for trained men and women. And I think most of us have done that in one way or another. To help promote a better understanding of Americans on the part of the people served. We probably did that willy-nilly, whether we intended to do it or not. And the third one is to help promote a better understanding of other peoples on the part of the Americans. So bringing it home, as it's often referred to. And some of us have probably done more or less than others, and you'll hear from the speakers how the experience affected them and what they may have done. We have 3 panelists. Tom Cutler, who went in immediately after graduation. Sam Bussell, who went in 10 years later with a wife and 3 children. And Tom Chapman, who went in with his wife, Donna, who was with us, who went in 45 years after graduation. So we have quite a range of experience. And for those of you who are thinking about it, it's not too late. But let's start with Tom Cutler. Tom, give us a brief introduction to why you went and what you did and where you
Okay,
went.
here we go. I have to start with, I guess, Kennedy's Ask Not speech, because I think that triggered in me and a lot of folks in our class the idea of going to someplace beyond business school. And I also credit William Sloane Coffin for getting me thinking about it, because we had a senior society meeting, let's say in January of 1962, and he was the guest speaker among the 15 of us. And he sort of went around the group after a while and asked what we were going to do after graduation. And we had a variety of answers, but none of them were very satisfying to William Sloane Coffin. And he immediately launched into I won't say a diatribe, but a persuasive argument to get us to think about something with service and adventure and travel and all the rest of it, and namely the Peace Corps. So after, I don't know, a couple of weeks, I started really pondering that. I had a job teaching English at Episcopal school outside of DC. But I began to think about the Peace Corps seriously, and I happened to be having a chat with another WIF who's a close friend, Charlie Michener, some of you probably know. And we both said, what do you think about this? And maybe we should try to get into the Peace Corps, and we might even go together. So we applied separately, but we both did get in. And they said we were going to be in Ethiopia. And I looked at Charlie, I said, do you know where Ethiopia is? And he said, no, but I said, I think it must be in South America near Bolivia and Colombia because of the IA. So anyway, we found it, and pretty soon we got letters saying you're going to be teachers in Ethiopia. And after a 6-week training program in DC at Georgetown University, off we went. And there were 300 of us. I think it was the third group. I think Ghana and the Philippines were ahead of the Ethiopia group, but we had to be the largest group going, 300 of us. And 50 of us were in Addis Ababa, the capital city. Charlie and I lived together for a year and had a very good experience. I taught history to 9th and 10th graders, and our textbooks were little British textbooks. There was nothing about African history, much less Ethiopian history, but there was a great deal about English kings and queens. So all the kids had to memorize all the kings and queens, because whatever was in the book was probably going to be on the test, and they worked very hard to talk about kings and queens and French and Indian, French wars with Britain, et cetera, et cetera. But we had a wonderful experience there. I spent 1 year there, and then I moved up to a little village with just 2 of us in Eritrea. I wanted to get maybe perhaps something a little bit more akin to the Peace Corps experience, because Addis actually was a fairly cosmopolitan city, and lots of Swedes and Israelis and Danes and British, as well as the Ethiopians. We lived with an Ethiopian as well. So I taught up there with one other volunteer, and had a very interesting experience. No drinking, only Coca-Colas. There was one movie, and that was The Absent-Minded Professor, and we saw that maybe 30 times, because that was the only movie they had in town. And then we ended up, and I left there, and I had as everyone has said, a life-changing experience there. And it continued, if you will, the idea of service, in that I came back and I had a call from Jack Wofford, and Jack Wofford was Harris Wofford's brother, and Harris was an advisor to Kennedy and was the country director in Ethiopia. And Jack said, there's a thing called the Office of Economic Opportunity getting formed, and would you like to be part of it? And I said, yes, I would. So I went to DC. Shriver became head of that, as well as the Peace Corps at the same time. They set up field offices, and I ended up in San Francisco, helping communities with their community action programs, coming up with a board of directors of the local program, which had to have 1/3 representatives of the poor. Well, that was a hot issue for 2 years there. Anyway, I had 2 good years there. Then I sort of missed the East. So I came back and got a job with John Lindsay in the Human Resources Administration, which was his anti-poverty program. And sort of continuing the idea of service and involvement in issues of the day, which is poverty and race and all of that.
Tom, can we hold at this point and let you pick up? That you provide a very good introduction, but we'll come back to you to be able to continue.
Absolutely, sure.
Starting with John Lindsay.
Okay.
Just a quick aside, I was invited also to be in that Ethiopia group. I went to law school for a year and then ended up going to Tanzania. But Brian McCauley from our class, I know, was also in that 300 group in Ethiopia.
And the 50 in Addis, yep.
Number 2 on our list is Sam Bussell, who went with his wife and children in a program that existed at that time, but did not exist before that time and didn't exist much after that time, which allowed you to bring your family and your children. Sam, can you provide us with 5 minutes of why you went and how you got there and what you did?
Sure, I'd be glad to. And I call myself Bussell. My wife calls it Bucell, and so it's a crapshoot as to what it goes for. Yes, I was in the Peace Corps for 3 years in Sierra Leone, and I went after architecture school. I stayed on at Yale for another 3 years in the Yale Architecture School, and then moved into teaching in Newton South High School in Boston, or Newton, and then did some work with the school because I was an architect. I did the work I did there had to do with architecture, art, and social studies. And I also was asked to do some specifications for the addition to the school, which was very intriguing. And in terms of the architecture school, and I'm trying to trace that all back given this conversation, and I think that I started with an interest in how people use space in buildings and how you can change behavior by the quality of the space, either good or bad, and designed a prison for my final work that I got in the program from my father, who was an architect, and got the program of a design in Trenton, New Jersey. So I talked to psychologists, I talked to a number of people to try to figure out how to humanize the participation in a prison. And so that really got me started, and I didn't realize it was getting me started for a long term. And then with the schools, it was the same thing, trying to talk to teachers about how you get the kids to thrive. I went then into New York and did the same thing with an environments group for designing schools. So that the whole interaction between the client and the building was my favorite. And that was going broke. General Learning was the company that I was working for. And so one of the directors there asked me if I wanted to go into the Peace Corps. We were just renovating a house on St. Mark's Place. We just had kids. We had a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old, or at that point, 1-year-old and 2-year-old, and a 10-year-old. So we waited a year to finish off the renovations we did in this house that we did in St. Mark's Place, and then went to the Peace Corps, all 5 of us. As Jay said, the Peace Corps was encouraging people who had experience in a profession rather than just out of high school, college. So we ended up in Sierra Leone, where he was the director of the program. And we ended up in Bo, which is up country in the middle of Sierra Leone. And I was the head of the Department of Public Works. We had about 6 workers there, with craftsmen, carpenters, painters, etc. And they had no work because there was no money to spend on building something or even repairing anything. until I extracted some from the American Embassy. So the first few first few months was spent training them into how to read blueprints. So that's really the extent. We extended for a third year because most of the buildings that we had gotten started weren't finished or were just getting started. So we came back for a brief time, maybe 3 weeks, and then went back there. And it was an incredible experience, of course, with those kids who were our answer to our access to all the people, and a family, a very, very sweet family, very tight neighborhoods, but it was great because the 9-year-old could put our daughter, a 3-year-old, on her back and carry her around the compound and babysit and such. So it really went extremely well. I'll finish that for now and then continue later.
Thank you very much, Sam. That was very good, and we'll hear more from you later. Our third panelist is Tom Chapman, but Tom is accompanied by his wife, Donna, and they both served as Peace Corps volunteers. So take a few minutes more than the others had, the two of you, please, and share on how you got there and what you did when you got to Mexico.
As Jay said, we were post-retirement participants in the Peace Corps in a new program at the time. I think others have talked about their life-changing experience in the Peace Corps. Well, I had mine in high school through American Field Service, where I was an exchange student in Greece for the summer, living with a family in Athens. And then Jay and the committee had urged us to consider how the Peace Corps affected our lives after Peace Corps. And I first thought, after Peace Corps, what life did I have after Peace Corps? I was already.
Why did you go?
Well, I'll get to that. Anyway, I reflected on it and indeed thought of many things that resulted out of the Peace Corps experience. Why did we go? Well, just a search for adventure and service. I didn't consider it when I finished college. I was more focused, I guess, on my career development. And I had applied for graduate school in the fall and was already admitted to UC Berkeley in December and had my future laid out for me. After 5 years in Berkeley, I went and taught chemical engineering at Wisconsin for 32 years. And after 32 years, Donna was ready to get out of Madison, and a Jersey girl, and born in Washington. So I had been looking at some international projects that didn't pan out. So I took a job with the National Science Foundation, managing research proposals and grants. So I spent 5 years in NSF. And at that point, I saw an ad in a technical or a professional magazine that there was a new program in Peace Corps in Mexico. And we had already decided to apply for Peace Corps, but although we were interested in Latin America, we were told, oh, we don't need anybody who speaks Spanish because we have a lot of Spanish speakers coming out of college. And they were talking about placing us in West Africa teaching. And but when I looked at the details of this program, it was something that was set up between George W. and the president of Mexico, Fox, to bring in experienced professionals to work in government research laboratories and centers to support industrial development. And so we were accepted for that program in 2005. I was in a center that focused on electrochemical technology and some environmental engineering water treatment projects. And Donna was?
Well, I'll start with my motivation. I wished, for all those years, 40 some years, that I had gone to Peace Corps right out of college. And so I regretted it. And when Tom retired from the university, we discussed it as the next step. And it didn't work out at that point. He came here to NSF, but when he retired from NSF, I said, okay, what are you going to do? Because, when you have this high-powered professional guy and his whole life is focused on this thing, and then he doesn't have to go to work, I'm like, wait a minute. We got to find something for you to do. So, and because I had always wanted to be a Peace Corps volunteer, we decided to apply in 2004. It took almost a year to get in, but we got in. And when we found this program in Mexico for senior technical people, I had a computer background, so I did systems analysis and programming and that kind of thing. So I went and worked in a lab that basically needed some help with knowledge management, is what they called it. So it was a great experience altogether.
Wonderful.
And I was pleasantly surprised that my assignment was basically as a visiting professor, because the centers had graduate students and they gave masters and PhDs. So it was, my job was mainly to advise the students on their projects. And I did a lot of editing of English manuscripts. In the 2 years I was there, we published more than 30 papers, which was a big jump in their productivity, mainly through the editing of the English, I think. Anyway.
Wait, you helped with the science too.
Yeah, I advised on the technical content. But I kind of skimmed over my career at the University of Wisconsin, but I did a lot there trying to create opportunities for engineering students to study abroad or to work abroad. And we were fairly successful. We had a number of consortia of engineering schools to take students who study Japanese to go to Japan for a summer course, and had other programs like that.
Great.
Anyway.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah.
And thank you, Donna. We'll come back to you to hear what this experience 45 years after graduation has made to your lives since. It's not been a long time, but I think you finished in what, 8, 9?
7.
7. Okay. So we'll get a few years here. Thank you. Going back to the main focus of the panel, the question of what 2 or 3 things happened to you and affected your life that happened because of Peace Corps. What did Peace Corps do to you that changed your life or directed your life or made a difference in your lives? And we'll go back to Tom Cutler. Tom, can you pick up on that?
Yeah, I think we've touched on it, all 3 of us, and the idea of service, and doing something for whatever issue was at hand and for other people, et cetera, et cetera. Also, teaching, I found, is helpful to the ego. If you like getting up in front of people and, making a fool of yourself or trying to talk intelligently, especially if there are Ethiopians, was exciting. And I loved it, and I was pretty good at it, I thought. But I wanted to just pick up on one other thing, and that was just, what did it do to me? Well, it engendered a love of travel and new experiences. And when I got married after the John Lindsay 2 years in New York, I thought it would be fun to try to go back to Kenya, because we had been to Kenya between the 2 years in the Peace Corps. And I knew a guy, Mike Speardoff at the Ford Foundation. He had worked at HRA as well. And he had helped me get a job in the Nairobi office, which was a sort of a dream job. My wife was pretty dubious about whether she'd enjoy it, but we all had a great year, and we stayed a 3rd year. So that kind of thing of finding adventure and finding a great way to contribute continued in my life. And then just a quick digression, I then decided I probably ought to get a job, a real job. I had worked for service organizations and government and whatnot. So I decided I was going to get an MBA, which I did get at Columbia. And then I got a job at Morgan Stanley. Why I did, I don't know, but I did. And, and after 4 years, we'll say I was doing okay. But 3 more years, and I knew I wasn't fit for the job. In fact, I had taken a test. I don't know if any of you took it, but it's like a what color is your parachute test, helping you decide what would be a good career for you, blah, blah, blah. And mine came back and said Boy Scouts and teaching and government work and helping others and whatnot. But whatever you do, don't be a banker. So, of course, I ended up trying to be a banker. Well, so anyway, I finally left of my own accord, but also of their accord. And I went back into a school called Poly Prep Country Day School in Brooklyn. And I started all over again as a teacher. And then I became a dean, and then I was a coach. And it was a wonderful school, and it fit with my goals because it prided itself on its diversity racially, ethnically, every which way. And in fact, we had one of our early students that I got to know a little bit was named Brian Flores. And I don't know if you've been reading the sports sections, but he was the coach of the Miami Dolphins until recently when he got fired and brought a lawsuit against the owners of the professional football teams. Anyway, Brian was always a very straight up guy, and he was a terrific football player as well. And we also had Al Sharpton's kids there. We had Meryl Streep's kids there. So it was a wonderful experience. And I also was teaching. I was in the classroom 2/3 of the time and loved being there. So it was kind of the end product. I stayed 25 years and retired. And it was like, that's where I started, was sort of as a camp counselor, teaching and kind of service to young people primarily. But the Peace Corps just picked up on that and drilled it into me. And that was where I really spent my life, following up those 2 years in the Peace Corps. Enough.
Anything that specifically you've done that would hit the third goal of bringing back the Peace Corps experience that you want to mention?
How do you mean bringing it back?
Well, the idea was to let people know, let Americans know more about what other countries are like, other people are like. Did you work that into your teaching, or is it?
I did. I often talked about that. And I also gave the commencement address one year at Poly. And the thrust of my remarks was, it's a new world out there. And if you spend any time at all, you can find programs that will take you abroad. And when you're in college, I'm talking to the seniors at Poly. And if you have any interest in doing something different, look into these programs and take a semester abroad or a year abroad. And for most kids, I think it fell on deaf ears, but I think that there were some parents who listened carefully and did follow up and ask me questions about it later on. So yes, I did. And when I first came back from the Peace Corps, I gave a couple of lectures at the local church. And I would actually talk until I bored people silly about the Peace Corps. So there we are.
I came from a meeting to run this meeting where another Peace Corps volunteer who was served in Peru was talking. I said, well, my only problem with the panel, I make sure they don't go too long. He said, yeah, Peace Corps volunteers can always talk about the Peace Corps experiences.
That's right.
We have a tendency to go on and on and on. Thank you so much, Tom.
Okay.
And moving on, just quickly on my own background, I went into the Peace Corps probably for two main reasons. One was to try teaching, and I learned that I probably like working more informally rather than formally in the classroom. And so I've had a career that's focused around that. Secondly, I went in on a more practical point of view. I decided I wanted to go to OCS when I was graduating, the Officers Candidate School for the Navy. They wouldn't take me because I had astigmatism in both eyes and didn't meet the minimum requirements. So I said, the only difference between me and my boss, and if I go into service, will be that he's got better natural vision than I do. And that didn't stick very well with me at that point. So I said, oh, I'm going to try Peace Corps and maybe I won't end up going to Vietnam and having to serve under somebody with better eyesight. So those are my two motivators for going into Peace Corps. Sam, what did you come away with?
The first one is our getting to know our neighbors. This is our group. These are our neighbors and us all dressed up in our garb that was natural to the country, and our Land Rover that we spent a lot of time in. And one of the young woman there in the middle came back with us. We brought her back, and she went to school locally here in Dutchess County. And the rest of them, my daughter on the top there, she was the climber, and we just had a fabulous time. The neighbors are next door. You can see the neighborhood, the next door neighbor's house. There were 3 wives, and they had a bunch of kids. I mentioned the kids that took Katrina on their back and took her around town. But the whole friendliness, the whole and being a family like this in a totally Black community. The only white people were missionaries, and they were in their own compounds, or Germans who were building roads. But our availability to the locals, and it was just fantastic. And certainly that was a part of the game changing, life changing that we experienced. The other, I guess we could see the other one because I got a little bit different perspective later on, whether I couldn't be bothered with shaving. And then the next 3 are just pictures of the work crew that I had working with them. They all called me Mr. Sam, which was kind of a generous and nice, and sort of recovering from the colonial control that they had in Sierra Leone. But this was making something called the Benny Seed Factory, which is a cereal that they were making, and we were grinding up the Benny seed. We could go on to the next one. We don't have to go very far to just demonstrate these well-intentioned workers that finally got some work out of this. This again was the Benny Seed Factory, and the next one is just another guy pushing up some concrete up to the roof of the Benny Seed Factory. So that gives you a little touch of what we were doing. We would go out on. We had one Peace Corps, not Peace Corps, a writer in a local town. There's our same age, and they had kids. So those were the only connections we had to the white folks. So I guess the other one other thing in terms of getting the message back to here, we've been dining out on this for the last 40, 60 years. And you can see maybe behind me on my left, the Bundu masks that we brought back that were the part of a society, the Women's Society, that my wife had a chance to go in. It was very private, very secret, coming out for the young girls. But we secured a few masks. The people would come by. They're all hand carved, obviously, with a very soft wood. And you're not supposed to take them out of the country. But we learned quite quickly that if you went into Freetown to the museum, you could buy a mask, which had clearly been taken from somebody and put in the museum, and then sold to the Germans primarily, who were there for the construction. I think that the impact of the experience certainly did get me into more of the kind of interaction of people. And I used to I put on my calling card when I was a consultant after I worked for an institution for the developmentally disabled in designing their day rooms and dormitories. And I call myself the inveterate networker. because I really enjoyed putting people together with other folks who didn't know each other, and on with ideas that were similar, but I saw the connection, but they hadn't really made the connection, and that's kind of the kind of thing I like to do. Even so, even now, with volunteer work at the moment, in housing, the affordable housing issue is really tremendously difficult here in rural Dutchess County. But the whole thing, I never could really be happy with a boss. So I'd invent these projects, or actually working with the Institution for the Developmentally Disabled. They had never had an architect working for them on salary. So I had so I had no boss there except for the director, who thought I was terrific. So so that lasted longer than I possibly would have expected, but it was very, very rewarding because of what we have done with the developmentally disabled ever since the mid 60s, or even mid 70s, in terms of getting them out of institutions and into places where they could actually interact with the normal folk. So that's kind of what I can contribute at the moment. I'd be happy to answer any questions. The real delight was having these kids. The kids, the 3-year-old would pick up the Mende language, and we'd go into a village, and this little girl, we'd ask her, "What are they saying? What are they saying about us?" Because of course we'd be suspicious. And also the other aspect of that, in terms of going into the Peace Corps, we were suspected of being the CIA. I was going to be working for the CIA.
A quick question for you, Sam. What impact from the experience on your children, if anything?
Well, the oldest one, the 10-year-old, he did extraordinarily well. He went to Christ the King College, which is a secondary school run by the Irish Catholics, with corporal punishment and standing in the sun when he misbehaved and such like that. Picked up the language, also the Creole language, and was just one of the only white guy in the entire school, just loving it. They loved to pat his hair, his blonde hair. But he went off on adventures with his neighbors or his classmates to fairs and such, and that was part of it.
Has he done anything since, when he came back, that's carried that experience over?
Oh yeah, he became a lawyer and an investor. No,
Okay.
no, he's been pretty straight. He lives in Westchester County.
Okay.
He does some interesting law business stuff now, but
Well, thank you so much. Go ahead.
well, the other two really, they remembered by the stories that we brought back with us and told endlessly at our cocktail parties or dinner parties, and we have all of this art around, which reminds them.
They've been imbued by it, but they not put anything forward themselves. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank
Tom
you.
and Donna, happened to you since you went into Peace Corps? You changed? You grew a beard or something like that?
Oh, I've had the beard for many years, but what happened was that when we came back, I was over at NSF on a review panel, and I was invited to come back and work in the international office as an expert. So I had 3 or 4 more years working at NSF. So in a sense, what Peace Corps did for me was to extend my career almost 10 years. So for whatever that's worth.
It kept you out of the house.
Yeah, right. But, as I reflected on it, we formed some wonderful friendships mainly with other couples who were there as volunteers. By coincidence, there were several from Portland, Oregon, and we've been out there several times, and we've traveled together. And anyway, and one of the couples was going to retire, buy a house in Querétaro, where we were based in Peace Corps. Querétaro is an old colonial city, a couple of hours north of Mexico City. Beautiful, charming place. Anyway, they ended up building a house on a rim of a crater lake in Nicaragua, unfortunately. But there was a local nearby shanty town that they adopted, so to speak, and they created first a business making cook stoves that are more efficient in burning wood and not polluting the air and so forth. And then they created a medical facility, and they hired a doctor. And then it went on from there to create a sports, what do you call it, field, court, and a community center. And we've been down there quite a few times before the COVID and before Ortega's latest election, if you want to call it that. But just being involved with them has been very rewarding, and seeing what they're accomplishing in kind of the more traditional Peace Corps activities.
Okay.
So,
Donna, on your side, you always wanted to be a volunteer. You finally were. What's happened?
Well, it's a little hard to say, but I really had a great time. And I think we have talked to our friends. I think a lot of times, by going to Mexico, we were very fortunate to go to Mexico because it's such a beautiful country. And part of our training was to learn about the culture and all that. And we already spoke some Spanish, so we were able to practice our Spanish. But what I lost my train of thought about the coming home and
spreading the word.
And spreading the word. Because in the United States, people go to the beach in Mexico and they hear about the border. And so we tell them, no, it is this incredible big country that it has all kinds of things. In fact, we just got another question, what was it, last night? It sounds so dangerous down there, and certainly there are places that are very dangerous, but it's, where we were and most of the country is very dangerous and very peaceful. And in fact, I think there's more danger in Washington, D.C. So it's been interesting to kind of know the people back there. We also have Mexican friends back there, and we're going to actually go there on Sunday back to the same city that we served in. And we were doing that almost every year after we served. So it's really enriched our lives. We were already travelers before that. We already had, outreach kind of activities, but Peace Corps just kind of put the broche de oro is what they call it, the little gold pin on our life experience.
Right. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And just to bring myself up to date with the rest of you, when I came out, I eventually got a doctorate in international education, but didn't spend it on that. I spent it more on teacher education and educational planning and continuing education. But I then got involved with, my wife said to me one day, you get really excited when you talk about your Peace Corps experiences. Is there anything you can be doing? And I was in the process of trying to change jobs at that point. And so I contacted friends from graduate school and who were working in Washington, and they helped set me up with meetings, various places, none of which offered me a job immediately, except a fellow graduate student who was now working for USAID, hired me for a month. And then when that finished, she said, I now have an opening for a year. So I said, okay, we're going to move to Washington. So that brought me to Washington, where I spent the rest of my 20-some years, 30 years, working for USAID, either on USAID funded projects or eventually inside USAID, recruiting and supporting programs that USAID had. The other thing I did that probably falls in this category is that I was a founder of the group called Friends of Tanzania. Many Peace Corps groups got founded, took their experiences and started something called Friends of wherever.
Right.
and their friends that are regional friends. There's probably friends in Hawaii. In general, it covers everything as opposed to friends of whatever. And we ended up starting this organization that spends most of its time supporting programs in Tanzania, but part of its time educating Americans about Tanzania and what's going on in the country currently. So those are my two contributions, involvements that happened afterwards that I can think of. There are other smaller things that took place, but as any of us who are volunteers know, we end up talking about our experiences, or somebody sees a piece of sculpture in or a picture on our wall and says, "What's that?" And then you end up talking for 20 minutes to an hour about it. I'm going to move into the second phase of the program here and call on Ken first. Reverse the order here. Ken, would you want to ask any questions or make any comments?
Yes, I really appreciate this chance to interact with everybody. I was impressed a few minutes ago. I checked to see how many people are participating on this morning's call. There are 41 people a couple of minutes ago. That's astounding. My involvement began during our senior year, actually the summer before. And my hometown is Washington, D.C. I was working with the Yale and Washington program in the State Department. I got a call one morning, said, Ken, Mr. Shriver would like to have lunch with you. I was shocked. I went down the next day, right across from the White House, and it was just Sarge Shriver and me. And he said, sit down. And before I'd even pulled the chair out, he said, Ken, we want you to go into the Peace Corps. Where do you want to go? Africa or Latin America? And I said, oh, can I think about it overnight? I was inclined to go to Africa because at Yale, I had two good friends who were exchange students from Nigeria. But my mom had grown up in Cuba, and Castro was going on about that time. And so the next morning I called up, and the contact for Shriver Haddad, Bill Haddad, and I said, well, I think I'd like to go to Peru. And so I then got introduced to everybody that was working in the new Peace Corps office in Washington. And I wound up becoming the unpaid Peace Corps representative in the state of Connecticut. And I went to every single college and university through during that year of 61 to 62, spoke at 10 different colleges about the Peace Corps, which was just starting up. And Shriver was very much a part of that. I got to Cornell for Peace Corps training, but long story short, I have a business card I designed, which is current in every respect, and it includes space to write what the contact and connection is, but right underneath it says Peace Corps Volunteer, Peru 3, 1962 to 64, because that was the transformative experience in my life. And then I write in whatever the connection is. It has influenced how we raised our children. We made sure, Kitty and myself, that our kids had high school experiences with AFS, with University, Crossroads Africa has had some influence, but our four kids got international experiences growing up, thanks in great part to the Peace Corps' impact. And what is another characteristic is that all of these dots of influence intertwine and interconnect. Yale and the Peace Corps and Stanford University, where I did my graduate work in anthropology. And now I'm still studying. I'm a graduate student working on an MDiv in Vancouver. None of this would have happened if I had not been in the Peace Corps. I worked in community development. That profoundly changed my life. I was too poor to afford a room at Machu Picchu in the Hotel Turista up there, but I wasn't deterred because I rode on top of the bus going up the Switchblade and slept in the ruins in Machu Picchu. because I was so poor I couldn't, on my Peace Corps stipend, to afford a room in the fancy hotel. So I lived that life of imposed poverty. In Spanish, it translates to the cuerpo de paseo. And so they did allow drinking, and I realized, oh, I better learn how to control this a little bit better, because I have more than one picture of me just kind of halfway passed out, really doing a lot less than changing cultures and changing lives. It changed me profoundly. And since then, here in Hawaii, we have a very active Return Peace Corps Volunteer Association. There are over 1,000 people throughout the state of Hawaii who were involved in the Peace Corps, from training and to serving abroad. And so I've been active with that organization. Community development, involvement in the barriadas, from the barriadas of Peru to being involved in the settlement areas where you find homeless. You can find homeless everywhere, but I spend a lot of my time advocating for the homeless issues here in Honolulu before the state legislature. I was a congressional page, so I know my way around the political world, and I know how to advocate, and I take that very seriously. So
Thank you.
yeah, this is amazing to see the impact, and to recall that cold winter night in New Haven when I went out on the New Haven Green and listened to John F. Kennedy talked about an idea he had picked up 2 days earlier from Hubert Humphrey about this Peace Corps idea. And went back to where one of my activities at Yale was the Yale Daily News production director, and began thinking about going, what I was going to do in the Peace Corps. So 5 days after Kennedy spoke at our graduation, I was on a bus from Washington, D.C., going up to Cornell to start my involvement with the Peace Corps formally. So I have never regretted it. We made sure that it has impacted the way we raised our kids. We made sure that they went abroad and had a transitional, transformative experience. And I'm still,
Thank you so much.
still happy.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let me call on Doug Bingham for a second. Doug, you want to add to that from your experience?
Yeah, all these stories about how people got into the Peace Corps, I was sort of thinking that I got into the Peace Corps almost kind of by accident. I had, as early spring in my senior year at Yale, I wasn't too sure what I was going to do with the rest of my life, and I applied to a couple of grad schools and so on. And it only happened that I forget when it was, in March or April or something, I went to a school reunion at Milton Academy, which is where I'd been before Yale. And one of my teachers there said, you really should get a hold of Bob Bates, who was a well-known mountaineer at Exeter, actually, who I also knew slightly. I knew him as well. And he said that Bob is going to be leading the Peace Corps group to go to Nepal, and you really should apply. And I hadn't really thought too seriously about Peace Corps. I had attended a little briefing session at Yale, I think, and I forget quite where it was, but about Peace Corps, and I hadn't thought too seriously about it. But anyway, I ended up calling up Bob Bates, and he's one of these guys who can sell you the Brooklyn Bridge. He just persuaded me to sign up, and they told me how to address the envelope, make sure that it would go to him, so I would go to Nepal instead of go to some random place. And it was, well, the rest is history. It was a life-changing experience, and I've never regretted it. I haven't done a great deal directly related to Peace Corps since, except that I did have the opportunity to go back to Peace Corps back to Nepal I guess the biggest thing that happened to me is I just fell in love with the country of Nepal. We were there before they'd ever heard of tourists, and it was a wonderful, friendly country, and they were so friendly and welcoming to Americans and so on. I had a heck of an experience there. And in 1975, I was back there on a brief visit with my then wife and 2-year-old son, just back to see my old stomping ground in Nepal. And as it turned out, tragically, my wife passed away while we were in Nepal. That's another long story, but that left me suddenly a single parent, not sure what I'm going to do with my life. I was at that point on my way to a job in Malaysia, but I ended up canceling out of that job and going back to the States. But before I left Nepal, I found out that there was an opening the following year, in 1976, for a Fulbright lecturer to go back to Nepal with. And so as soon as I got back to the States, I applied to that, and I got it. So that was another 2 years I spent in Nepal, again teaching, this time at the college university level, and also in Kathmandu rather than Pokhara where I had been. But one of the things that I came to realize, especially in my first experience in Nepal and Peace Corps, was that Peace Corps in those early days, I think they changed a lot later, but they had this kind of arrogant attitude that you take any American, no matter what its training or education, and stick them into some job in some developing country, foreign country, and he can do a better job or as good a job as the locals without any, like local trained teachers.
We were called BA generalists.
BA generalists, I guess. But I never had stood up in front of a classroom before in my life. I'd not done any teaching. I had no teaching education. And here I discovered I was going to be a teacher in Nepal. And I don't think I'll ever forget my very first day standing in teaching school there. I was standing in front of a class of about 75 kids, fairly big class of I think 7th grade, teaching them science and math, and having to do it all in a foreign language because they didn't speak English, and we had, of course, the usual Peace Corps crash course in language. And I ultimately learned the language quite well, but in the beginning it was a struggle, I tell you. I think I did a good job of teaching in the end, but not having had any training or knowing how to do it. I was just sort of trying to do it the way I remembered having been taught. And then my second period, and later as a Fulbright scholar or lecturer, was also teaching, but that was quite a bit different. And I was able to do at least most of that in English, so that wasn't so hard.
That's great.
So I don't know what else
Well, that's enough for now.
back on about.
We may have questions coming up, but Lee, do you have any questions that have been sent in on the chat line for us to respond?
The only question that's been coming on the chat line so far is one. Actually, Tim made a response to everyone. It's about, could we have coffee hours at different times, like later in the afternoon, because at least one person is saying this time never works. So we don't have other questions. The one thing to be aware of is the plan for today's agenda is to switch to reunion in about 15 minutes. So whatever questions people do want to address, now's the time.
Okay. Just show your hand, and Lee and Tim will let me know who's got their hands up.
Larry Price.
Larry,
Okay.
go ahead.
Using the old-fashioned way.
The old fact. Yes. This question I would direct to you, Jay, and probably Sam and Tom. When you were in these places, how much support did you get from the Peace Corps? I gather, sort of from Sam's comments, you kind of got dumped into the country and that was it, and you were in business for yourself. Is that a false impression?
Yes and no. Let me start. One of the things that happened in my Peace Corps training group, and we had a very long training, was that they decided during our first vacation, we were all teachers, that they would bring us to a town and have sort of a chance to review. And my Peace Corps roommate was put in charge of a small group that was to talk about staff and volunteer relationships. And he got up there, and I happened to be standing in the back with some of the staff, and these jaws of my staff members all dropped because my roommate said, basically, if you leave them alone, they'll leave you alone. And that was, I think, somewhat of an attitude the volunteers had. Once you got settled, you were on your own, and I think you were sort of expected and took on the ethos that you were out there sort of pioneering. Now, underneath it all, Peace Corps had, in many cases, arranged for where we were going to stay. They had checked out the schools we were going to be teaching in, if we were teaching, whatever we were doing. So there was a lot of work that Peace Corps had done to get us started. They were always there if you had a medical problem. You may not get a response right away, but we all had medical kits that we could do things with legally and illegally. And we had that kind of support. And then in the early days, or at least where I was, you couldn't go on vacation unless you let Peace Corps know you're going on vacation or that you were on a work job. But you need to get money. In Tanzania's case, the embassy in Tanzania was limited to 5 people. And so they had, all the money was coming out of Kenya. So if you needed extra money to go on vacation, which they had for you, you had to put in for it with Peace Corps in advance. My money never arrived until after my vacation times. So I didn't get that kind of support there. But essentially, we were on our own. Sam, you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, for sure. In terms of the support, there was one woman in Washington who didn't like this project in terms of getting families over to any part of the country. And her name, I can't remember what her name was, but so she was giving us a hard time, thinking we were overspending with our kids. And at one point, we also got accused of using Band-Aids for artwork because we used so many. And the kids were always getting bitten or something, so they needing Band-Aids, not for an art project. And then it was hard to keep the kids healthy in this country, which was known as the white man's grave because of the tsetse fly. But otherwise, the doctor was competent and responsive when we went to Freetown, which was about a 3-hour, 4-hour drive, maybe 60 miles. And we had Reggie and Celeste. Reggie was in charge of the volunteers, and that was a lovely couple. Actually, we're going to go see him in Washington or in North Carolina a couple of weeks from now. And he collected these mats that I showed you. But for the most part, we were on our own. We didn't really, we knew a few of the younger Peace Corps volunteers. They were mostly in the villages as teachers. And so we really did just, do it and float it on our own. That's a good question because it is, and it wasn't in any way deferential. They were deferential to us, but not hugely impressed by.
Tom Cutler, any comments from your side?
Yes, the first year and the second year in that light of other support from the Peace Corps were very different, because in the first year we were there with 50 other volunteers and we socialized a lot with each other, with the other volunteers. We even came up with a singing group, Charlie and I and 2 young women, and we serenaded Haile Selassie, by the way. Not many of you did.
Yeah.
We were pretty good, by God. But anyway, so there we sort of took care of each other, but the second year in Eritrea, Agardat, Eritrea, I was with one other volunteer. Happily, he spoke some Arabic. He was there the first year and the second year. But really, the other teachers became our social life, and the kids, and we learned volleyball. We built a school with the help of some of the kids and their parents, but it was much more out on your own. And luckily, we didn't have any health issues. But that actually, in a way, was more, quote, Peace Corps-y, which is kind of why I went out there than the first year.
Good, thank you.
As someone who, your second year, you were in Eritrea, I'm just curious to what extent you followed Eritrea, to feel any kind of emotional investment. It's been a challenging spot in the world.
Indeed, yeah. And in fact, when we were there, this is 1963, one day I would say to the kids, where is Ahmed? And they'd say, they all get very quiet. And it turned out my other roommate there, he'd find out that the kids had gone off that kid had gone off with the Shifta, and those were the rebels. And it began, there was the anti-Ethiopian, and that's continued, of course, to this day, up and down with the war between Eritrea and Ethiopia. And first Ethiopia seemed to win, and Eritrea won after 30 years. And then again, more recently, as you know, we've had terrible times over there in Tigray. And I didn't know the Tigranians, but I knew a little bit of Tigrinya, the language. And it's very depressing because the terrible things we're reading about in Ukraine were also happening nowadays in Tigray, with the Ethiopians mauling the Tigrays and the Tigrays mauling the Ethiopians. So it's like it's sort of gone on for a long time. So even when I was there, it started.
Okay, thank you.
Lee, any other questions out there?
I'm not seeing any.
Any raised hands?
I'm
Yeah,
not
go ahead,
seeing that
Ken.
either.
Yeah, I'd like to, this is Ken in Honolulu. I would like to comment too and ask if you could elaborate on other relationships with the AID, for example. Many Americans in Peru had the image of never getting outside of nice communities, nice neighborhoods, and the Peace Corps did. And one time I was trying to get $5,000 as a USAID grant to help with materials, building and rebuilding a library in the barriada where I lived in Ica. And I went to the embassy in Lima, sat down with the officer from the USAID and told him my case. I needed $5,000. Could you help me? And he looked at me and said, well, Ken, we'd like to help, but if you were asking for $500,000, I could help you, but we can't help you with $5,000. So there was a definite difference of perspective. I never got the 5,000, but we found other ways of getting that library up.
You should have gone to the ambassador for his discretionary fund. You probably would have had a better chance for it. No,
We have one question in the chat, Jay.
Okay, one question in the chat, and I just
They're
want
from the irrepressible Peter Torgiani. And the question is, I guess for anybody, do you believe, like I do, that everybody is expecting a global civilization of love?
Do we on the panel believe that? No, I don't think so. I think our experiences, as you've just heard about Tigray, show that that's not likely to happen. And certainly my feeling the same way. You just got one more I see in the chat too.
Did Peace Corps service automatically lead to a draft deferment, or did any of you have to battle your local draft board?
After my 2 years, I got extended for a third year, and in the beginning of that, my mother panically sent a telegram saying, Pete, your draft board wants you to report because your 2 years are up. And I'd already started my third year. So I said, no, I've started a third year, draft board, let me go. We had volunteers in Peace Corps in general in those days who were drafted out of Peace Corps. We had volunteers who were deferred. I ended up eventually being deferred, whether it's because I had enough candidates or whether because I'd served in the Peace Corps. It really depended on your local draft board. And we had people who were military, who already served in the military before they came into Peace Corps, into my Peace Corps group. But I think there was a variety of experiences. I would say from just hearsay that at least 85%, 90% of volunteers got deferred. There were some who came back and went on and served deliberately after their 2 years. or the draft board said, we're coming to get you. So it varied considerably on that.
I have one Peace Corps story that's sort of a little different. In 1963, I had a girlfriend who just graduated from Barnard, and she applied to the Peace Corps, and the FBI came to me to interview me about her, and I was trying to be very helpful, and I was answering every question until they asked me, "Did you ever hold yourselves out as husband and wife?" Now, this is 1963. And I didn't know what to say. As a matter of actual fact, we had, because in those days, when you traveled, and we sometimes traveled together, when you stopped at a motel, you had to sign in as Mr. and Mrs. You don't have to do that anymore. But we had signed in as Mr. and Mrs. But I said, I refuse to answer that question. I don't think it has anything to do with her qualifications, and I refuse to answer it. I wonder if any of you who had applied to the people knew about interviews that were going on and about you, and if anything interesting happened in those interviews.
The only thing I know offhand is that requirements for all volunteers, as with State Department people now, the local police or somebody would interview the people who lived to the south of you, to the east of you, to the west of you, and to the north of you. And sometimes that was a lot of traveling. They also talked to your local police chief. And they would talk, if they had the time, to anybody who you had had a close relationship with. So that's probably how you got involved. But I don't want to use up more time here. Lee, would you pick up?
Well, first, thanks, Jay, to you, to the panel, to all the volunteers. This has really been just fascinating. It's made me re-question everything I've done with my life. So I have to start thinking here. But we said on the agenda that we would save time for John Stewart and maybe anybody else on the reunion committee to talk about the current state of reunion planning and to respond to any questions. So if John is still here, it's yours.
Things are really moving along. You'll be getting a letter from Dan, and that'll point you to the Yale reunion page, and you sign up online. You don't have to send in a form. The planning is set. The program is set. You'll get that in the 2 letters that are going out to you. If you want more, I can answer any questions. Or I recommend Tappy's piece on the class website. He's the greatest salesman for reunion attendance, much better than the rest of us. But it's a great program. It is not enormous. What we did in the last meeting was turn down suggestions for more content. We've got plenty of content, and you're leaving plenty of time for us all to talk to each other, tell stories, and yak. Food is planned. It'll be good. The wine, all that stuff. Here's a quick review of the planned programs. David Blight, history professor, Pulitzer Prize winning, will talk about his most recent book. A professor named Matthew Kotchin from the School of Environment, which is a new school, will talk, as Tappy puts it, about the Yale we did not know. There's a panel on our Asia and cultural affairs with Fred Starr, Kent Hughes, and David Scharf. And Sam Waterston is going to lead a discussion about class members that are still working after age 80. There are going to be tables for class members to acquaint us with their written projects or art or whatever they want. There will be Friday night, Finklin Whedon will entertain. Saturday night, the hockey coach Keith Allen will be a guest and will speak. And one of the things that Tappy's done that I'm most intrigued by is a woman named Andy DeRiff, whom some of you may know, who was in the original Yale College women's class, would get up and do what Tappy described as a toast to our class, but also maybe tell us some stories firsthand about what it was like in those late 60s. Any questions, email almost any of us, and we'll be glad to answer them. Or if you have any answers, questions now, let me know. Thanks. I mean, I'm not even on the committees. I just sort of hover in the backgrounds and go, do it. And they all do. They're wonderful. I would put out another thank you to our fantastic communications team. They are doing such a great job. They've subdivided to support the three things: the YAM column, the web page, websites, more than a page, and this terrific coffee hour, which I would regard as the most successful and interesting one yet. And they've planned out the next 6 months. Unbelievable.
Yeah, I have a question. Are we going to have a physical presence, a desk or a table or a room on the campus during our reunion?
Well, it's all live, and at this point, no masks are required. I mean, it's going to be very much like any other reunion has been for us. There are Yale-wide events, but the tent will be as always. There'll be tables. The food will be not. We felt that at the 55 table service was cumbersome and lengthy. They'll be go pick up your foods. I'm not sure. Does that answer your question? Did I understand it right, Ken?
Well, sort of. I just wanted to know if we had a contact point physically.
That's a good question.
During the 9th through the 11th of June.
Yeah, there's there will be in Timothy Dwight. That's where we all be. To register, we think we'll be in the Rose Alumni House, which is next to, as you all know, it used to be a fraternity. I forget which one. Deke? Was it Deke? Tom? Was it Deke? Next to the Dramat, in any case. And usually there's, questions about parking and those kind of things are all now already answered on the alumni page and much of the specifics. So yeah, I mean, the meeting is in Timothy Dwight once you registered.
Great.
A great silence has fallen. I mean, I also feel, I'm really excited. The other thing I might say is I went into Timothy Dwight on Monday to look for a rehearsal space for the Whiffs. And I walked in there, I hadn't been there in 40 years, and memories did not overwhelm me, but the feeling of being in there, and it looks immaculate. It's so well kept now. There weren't many students around. It was almost like a time warp, but it was a wonderful feeling of remembering 3 very busy and happy years in Timothy Dwight. For all us TDers, it'll be an added impetus to come, I think. Although I think we all get that when we go into whichever college we either lived in or which was our reunion. It's great.
Hey, John, thank you for all you do for the class.
Oh, you're more than welcome. It's a great pleasure. It really is. When I first took it on, I thought, geez, what do I, and then I realized, it took me more longer than it should to realize it's a great honor. It is a great honor to serve this role. And as an undergraduate, I never thought it would fall in my lap like this. But I'm very grateful for the opportunity, and it's fun. And also, I mean, I've gotten to know guys that I didn't know, which one of the attractions of the reunion. I think I wrote in my note, we've all lived over 80 years, which is luckier than some of the departed, and we all have lived rich, fascinating lives. We have great stories to tell, and I think we all want to hear them.
As we're close to wrapping up, John mentioned the communications team. One of the questions that often comes up in the communications team is, what else could we be doing? What do our classmates really want? And if anyone has anything they'd like to yak about now, yak is part of the reunion theme now. Or if you'd like to think about that and send us input later on, we really are very interested in hearing from as many people as possible about what are you most interested in? What should we be doing for the coffee hours? What should we be trying to get on the website, and so on?
And I might just add on to that. I think this session showed in a wonderful way how great it is to hear people's experiences. And people have all kinds of different experiences, both when we were at Yale and then since then. And the class is a very rich resource. So yeah, I would second what Lee said. If anyone has any suggestions, or if you know of people in the class who have really interesting stories, or if there are certain themes or certain types of experiences that you know some people have had, any ideas like that for future sessions, we're very interested in hearing about. Oh, I should also add that Jay, in addition to the great work he did today, has also agreed to be on the task force we have for the coffee hours. So Jay and Lee and I will be working on the coffee hours together. So if you want, you could just contact any one of us individually, or you could contact Jean, and we'd love to hear your ideas.
If there are no further comments, you know, if we end now, we'd be 3 minutes early, which I've learned is not a bad thing. So.
All right.
I want to thank you all for coming. This is, as Tim was saying, hearing these experiences, it's really very exciting.
Definitely.
And even though most of the volunteers aren't people I really knew back when, the opportunity to hear what your life has been like and what that Peace Corps experience is just a total delight. So thank you all for coming. And we're looking, as John mentioned, we've got a tentative plan. Not everything is locked down for the next several months, so there may be changes, but we're trying very hard to come up with a varied and interesting program. So we'll hope to see you again at another coffee hour. And we will think about the issue of time. Is the time that we've always had them basically at 1 p.m. But that doesn't work for everybody. And are there other times that work better as part of the conversation? If you have any ideas about that or anything else, let us know. Thanks everybody, and have a great day.